My next guest suggests the struggle and transformation of the caterpillar is a metaphor for the human experience when dealing with difficult questions. Stay tuned for a thought-provoking conversation with author and storyteller Lable Braun. Lable is the first honoree of the Albert Hazen Smith Philosopher's Circle. Today we examine the power and importance of questions.
You are watching Profunda TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
Very grateful to be here, Phyllis. Can't imagine anywhere I'd rather be at the beginning or any other part of the year. And I just want to say that personally, I would like to dedicate this conversation to Albert Hazen Smith, who the Philosopher's Circle is named for. He was an extraordinary teacher, mentor, human being, and role model. And I always remember him saying, which was the genesis of this whole conversation, he would say, answers are a dime a dozen. Good questions. Now, those are hard to find.
What can you say motivated you to write this book of questions that is so special to you?
It's going to sound grandiose, but I saw the fabric of our society falling apart. I saw people only interested in answers and very, very, very sure that they had all the right answers. And anyone who disagreed with them had the wrong answers. This was, by the way, back in 2008. So about 17 years ago. And I have to start off by saying it hasn't gotten any better since then. And it's really important to understand how important questions are. I'll start off with a little story. There was somebody who was called a Maggid in Judaism. A Maggid is like a preacher, a storyteller, and he would take the most complex topics in Jewish law and things that are answers to how we should behave, how we should live, how we should answer to each other, and he turned them into a story. And they were always right on point. And people asked him how he managed to create these points out of those stories. And he said, well, once I was walking in a forest, and from tree to tree, I saw an arrow that had hit a painted bullseye right in the center. And I was wondering, how is that done? Then I came across a little boy with a bow and arrow. I said, are all these your work? And he said, yes. And I said, how did you do that? How did you do that? Hit the bullseye every time. And the little boy answered, well, first I shoot the arrow and then I paint the bullseye around it. So stories, questions, those are what make the bullseye meaningful. And so we've got to start with what makes things meaningful. And that's a question. Because what question is the answer answering? That is really the essence of things. So I wrote a book titled In Case of Emergency, Ask Question. And the best way to perhaps talk about why I felt that book was important was by the very last section that I wrote in the book. The caterpillar enters the chrysalis for a period of transformation. In the chrysalis, its internal organs are literally melted down, and rearranged so that a beautifully transformed butterfly can emerge from the shell. The questions cause queasy stomach moments. We thought we had things all figured out. And then there's a question, and our stomach goes all queasy. And that moment can be terrifying. Our stomachs are queasy because the organs of our soul are being melted for transformation. It is the questions that we face that melt the confining structures of our lives and enable us to turn the page and tell the next chapter of our story. The process can be traumatic, but it results in the beauty of the butterflies we are each meant to become. Every emergency that engenders a question is really an emergence-y. And that to me is the essence of the importance of questions, that they transform us. They transform the conversation. And we, as human beings, love to live in certainty. I've mentioned this in several other conversations. It is really our Achilles heels, our need for certainty. But if we want to blossom as a butterfly, we have to ask the question, go into the chrysalis, have everything that we know melted down, and come up with a beautiful answer that exactly matches the question.
Given this, I think about all the times as a young person when I've gone to ask a question, you can get one of two reactions. Like, you get the suggestion that maybe you're dumb because you're asking a question. Didn't you understand what I said? Or you're interrupting, or the question is viewed as your insufficiency in some way. Am I misreading the societal interpretation, original societal interpretation of questions?
Unfortunately not. And that's why people who understand the importance of questions and have utilized them to good effect need to stand up and talk about this, because we are trained in exactly what you said from our earliest days. We come out of the womb. We know nothing. It's a strange place to us. It doesn't look at all like the inside of our mother's belly. And we don't know how this works. We don't know how the boundaries are. And so we are born as question machines. Children are the greatest source of questions that we have. But then comes what I call the why game. The child asks why, and the parent answers. And the child follows on by saying, why? Why is that answer so? And the parent answers. This goes on for a few times. Because of this. Why? Because of that. Why? Because of this. And finally, the parent gets really, really upset and says, look, we can do this all day. It's not a good use of our time. That was the best use of the parent's time that they can possibly have with the kid. And yet it's not good use of our time. Then why do I have to do any of that if I don't understand it? Well, because I say so. And that cuts it there, right there. And we learn that questions aren't good things. I better have answers. And then we go to school. And fortunately enough, I am married to an unbelievable teacher. And, as I gained insight into the educational system, I realized, my goodness, it's the why game all over. It's, why is that the correct answer to this? Because I said so. Unless you're a fantastic teacher like my wife is. And think about standardized tests, right?
I try not to.
I try, me too. You get 4 choices you can answer. Those are your only ways to answer a question, to answer the question they're asking. Why can't you put a question down there? Sometimes questions are a lot more brilliant than the answers are. Sometimes all the answers are wrong because somebody hasn't asked the right question. And you know what you get when you base your education on standardized questions? You get standardized people. And that's where our society is heading to today. Everybody's got to have the same opinion. Everybody's got to act the same way. Everybody's got to vote the same way or they're a monster. We are become a society of standardized people. And I don't like how the future looks for that.
I think we're at a point where we could open it up to questions. What do you think?
That's what we're here for today, right? It's a day of questions, so anytime.
I think some people are afraid of what the answer will be.
Mm-hmm.
I think that happens quite often. And also, I think some people will ask a question assuming what the answer will be, or just will ask a question and already have an answer of the person that they're asking the question to.
So I think that's a really good observation, but I have a question about that. We've all been in so many different forms of careers and our lives. How many people here, by a show of hands, have seen people marching off very efficiently, exactly in the wrong direction? Raise your hand if you've seen this. Oh, it seems to be a universal situation. What would you rather have? An answer you're afraid of, or to end up in the wrong place?
Absolutely.
And I think people have to understand that. And we'd live in a wonderful society if they did.
I think I would hope that people would be open to accept the answer, but that doesn't always happen. It doesn't, and one can't force that on others. One can suggest it, but if a person is not open,
there are things you have to do to make it clear how the answer needs reframing, because, and it won't always work. I think in terms of, I was once the manager of this very large project for a very large corporation, and I tried to tell them about how they're marching into exactly the wrong direction. And I couldn't get through to them. And so I resigned. I said, this is the only way I can get your attention. And I resigned. And they still were marching off in the wrong direction, ended up with a $90 million mistake. And that's big money, even for a big corporation. But at least I felt I did what I could. And that's all any of us can do. Just do what we can.
But coming from a government background where, without talking management and employees, we could probably talk for hours on that. But the managers in the government generally were very poor. Managers were chosen because they had a technical proficiency in whatever area it was, but they knew nothing about management of people. What that has to do with questions, if they didn't have a precise answer from their experience doing technical work, you were wrong. And there was absolutely no way to talk them into, changing their minds. I think we're in a society where we have two different groups of people, and neither one, no matter what the questions are going to change their minds.
Sometimes a great question can unlock that, though. I'm put in mind of a management guru whose name I'm trying to remember, but I'm 73 years old and I can't necessarily remember everybody's name. But he was doing a presentation, and this was a brilliant guy. And one guy walks up to him afterwards and says, "Oh, that all sounded good, but that would never work with my people. They are the laziest people in the world. They really don't care about anything. They don't understand what I'm trying to get them to do. They're incapable. They're stupid. And the guru said, well, I have just one question. If they're that way, why did you hire them? And the guy says, well, they weren't that way when I hired them. Aha. Aha.
Stop talking, really. Stop talking now.
And so the
Wallace,
light
go
bulb
right.
went on there.
I think
Larry.
Wallace has a question. Go
Larry,
ahead.
Hi, Wallace.
you said, hello. So nice meeting you. Larry, you had a line a minute ago. You said, we humans love to live in certainty.
Yes.
And I thought that was a great line. There's a writer that I encountered lately, and Phyllis knows her, Gail
McLean. Yes.
McLean, who talks about labels. She wrote a piece about labels, how we label and want to label people. We must label people. And her argument is that we do this out of terror, she says, because we must know what label to put on. So we ask the question. First question we ask, what do you do? And we offer up pretty quickly what it is that we do, she says. And she says, by doing so, with both of those questions, because we have preconceived notions about those things that they do or we do, we put ourselves and them into some sort of prison. What do you think about that?
Well, as a person whose name is Lable, I guess I can't complain. But
yeah, right.
But I think what it's really linked to is that we have a 3-pound mechanism living inside us called the brain. And the brain is the ultimate gas hog. It's about 2% of the body's mass. It uses about 25% of the body's oxygen and 27% of the highly oxygenated blood. It uses about 20% of the oxygen, about 25%. I may be a little off on some of those figures, but again, I'm 73 years old, so I take.
I'm 80. You're forgiven.
Okay, thank you. But it's basically on that ratio. So it not only uses as much of the energy in the body, but it uses high test stuff, and it is, and so it cannot possibly do everything that's demanded of it. So it creates shortcuts. It likes to put people and things into boxes. There was a brilliant experiment that was done a while ago where the subjects watched a bunch of people talk about something. And half of the people who were talking about things were white, half of them were black. And then they were asked to match up a statement with the picture of the person with the person who said it. And they found that if they misremembered which person said it, they attributed it to another person of the same race. It's like, all right, I knew it was one of those, and that's the brain taking a shortcut. But here's the interesting thing. Race is a very, very sensitive topic. And we think that trumps everything. But they reran the experiment. In this case, it was equally black, equally white, but half of them were wearing red T-shirts and half of them were wearing blue T-shirts. And then they asked, okay, who said this? And if people misremembered who said that, they attributed the statement to another person of the same color T-shirt, not the same color skin, the same color T-shirt. The brain puts things into easy boxes, the easiest box that it can, and tries to say, okay, now I've got it. and it really can't help itself. It doesn't have the energy to do what we ask of it. Yes.
I remember a long time ago having a conversation in a very serious medical setting for my husband with a doctor who was in charge of a clinical trial. And I remember asking him some question about a holistic approach to the situation. And his response was, "How dare you ask me? I am the head of this program. You either want to be in this trial or not." So, so I really want to examine who gets the right to ask a question. How do you give yourself permission to ask? Are there situations in which you don't ask because you're too afraid to ask? I just wanted to put it on the table. Some of us have had to deal with the medical profession and how they've dealt with questions. I'd love to hear some comments about that.
My experience was really different from that. When my husband was very ill, he had 3 rounds of cancer over like 15 years. And we had selected, with the help of a lot of people who cared about us, the best team we could possibly put together. And they were extraordinary. They didn't behave that way at all. They took every question you had. If I would say, "I'm not following you," all right, "you're going too fast," or "you're using too much technical lingo. Can you say this to me like in a straight sentence so I can get it?" And they were just wonderful. I think I talked to my primary care physician for years as a woman who graduated at the top of her class from Harvard. And one of the things she told me when she was working with me just as a patient was, "Jacqueline, years ago, even the last maybe 10, 15 years ago, we weren't taught really anything about relationship building, style of communication, empathy, checking in with your person that you're talking to, see if they're with you." She said all that was ignored for the factual, technical expertise. My experience is that has improved a lot, but it's not gone. It's definitely not gone. And every once in a while, you run into people who are full of themselves. And doctors, unfortunately, are pretty notorious about that. Some of but we were lucky. We had some wonderful ones. They were just great, and they actually say they prolonged my husband's life in a way we never expected was going to be able to happen. And when it got to the end, it was the end. But they were just amazing to us.
Does anybody remember Dr.
Thank you,
Oliver
Jacqueline.
Sacks? Thank you, Jack.
Yeah.
Does anybody remember Dr. Oliver Sacks? He was a brilliant, brilliant neurologist. He was the one that the movie Awakenings was based on. And he once said, and this one struck me right to the heart, and I think it's the best statement I've ever heard about the medical profession. He said, "The medical profession will never achieve its full potential as long as it keeps asking, what kind of disease does the patient have? Instead, it should ask, what kind of patient does the disease have?"
Hmm.
We're all individuals. We're all unique. I once saw a bumper sticker that says, "You are absolutely unique, just like everyone else." And that is who we are. We're unique people. Now, part of this, as I am coming to understand, is the corporatization of medicine. I have heard many doctors tell me, "I can't practice medicine the way that I want to anymore." And one doctor actually told me that the company they worked for has mandated that you spend no more than 7 minutes per patient. What can you do in 7 minutes? How deeply can you go? How much can you consult with the patient in 7 minutes? I think that we are bred to to respect expertise, and that's good. Healthy respect is good. but a healthy amount of cynicism is good as well. Who are the most cynical group of people in the world? Who would you take a guess they are?
No guess here.
Did I see Wallace raise your hand?
I did. I'm going to cut this as short as I can possibly cut it. I've been through a year of declining health when I was trying to get the attention of the medical community that there was something wrong. And I went from in pretty good health to a position where I was having to use a cane to get around, and where I knew that there was, that things were just not going right. And I knew it was all in my cervical spine area. They just sent me back and back to physical therapy. Finally, listen, you're gonna love this one. I end up in the hospital because I have diarrhea. That's the reason. But because I'm in the hospital, I get the attention of the hospital neurologist who gets me an MRI. The MRI is looked at by the spine doctor. The spine doctor says, I think you were weeks away from losing some significant functionality. And I get the surgery that you see now I'm wearing this collar for. Earlier this week, I went back to my primary, and she said, I'm embarrassed and sorry that you're the one who had to remind me that as a primary physician, my number one job is to listen. And I failed to do it in your case. I think that's where we are. And corporatization is a good point. The squeezing of the time that doctors can spend with a patient. They don't have time to listen. They need to move you along. I think it's a huge issue for us.
It is.
And I think the only answer for us as individuals is to scream out loud when we know there's something wrong.
I think you're absolutely right. It's up to us because the physicians are so rushed they can't think of doing that themselves. I believe that what the physicians and science in general needs to do is go back to being scientists. And the most cynical group of people in the world are supposed to be scientists.
Right.
The basis of science is cynicism. Yeah, I know what has science absolutely proved in all the years it's been around? The answer is nothing. In terms of the scientific method, what they've done is it hasn't been disproved yet, but we keep trying. We keep trying to run experiments to see, is it still meeting the reality? But that's not there anymore, or at least it's a lot less. Scientists, the number of experiments that are run to test, to verify an experiment that's already been run is minuscule compared to new experiments. Why? Because if you run a new experiment that has a breakthrough, you're put in line for tenure, you're put in line for position. But if all you do is run experiments that try to test other experiments, then you don't get that preferential treatment. And it's really a crisis in science. Studies have done that show that the majority of findings that we say trust the science because that experiment's been done are either non-verifiable or haven't been tested yet to be verified, or if they've been tested, the results cannot be duplicated. An atrocious amount because nobody's asking the questions. And that's where I think it all comes down to the critical importance of questions. So if nobody's asking the questions, I would beg everybody in the audience, you be the one to ask the questions. Yes, will you be treated like a pain in some circumstances? Yeah, but then be a pain.
Yeah. I'd like to just add one other thing. I noticed. I think it connects with kind of the way people respond. In every company I work for, there are a lot of really, really good people, really good managers, very talented, working very hard. But the underlying problem was the push on time. Everything was more, faster, go, add this to the list. I can't do it. I've got a big list. Just put it on the list. No taking things off the list. And I think that crush around time made good people go faster.
Yes.
And questions take longer. They challenge assumptions. They bring learning. They bring need for understanding. And people feel the pressure. I watched these people who are like ones and twos of kind in the world, responding to the pressure of move, get it done, get on to the next thing. And I think that's still true. I think everything we said is true, but I think time is a huge factor as I looked at it. It's like trying to get someone's attention for 5 minutes that was not about cut and run. That wasn't always easy to do.
And time, the real irony of that is it takes time, more time, to when you do it wrong. Well, Phyllis mentioned I was a project manager. There are studies that show we have 6 phases to the development cycle. Every phase later that you find an error takes 6 times the amount of money, time, and resources to fix. So, if you find it at the very end, it's 6 times 6 times 6 times 6 times 6. And God forbid you find it on the customer site, right? The customer buys the product, they find the bug for you. Well, now it's 6 times 6 times 6 times 6 times 6, and you've lost the customer and your reputation. People don't think rationally.
Minx, you're very quiet. Do you have a question, Minx?
Yeah, I do. I'm going to botch up the numbers on this, but many years ago, because coaching is all about asking questions. And so they did an experiment that they shared with us when we were students it was about doctors, and they were asked, like 24 doctors had their patients, and they were instructed from the time the patient walked in and said, "What's going on?" They had to keep their mouth shut. They couldn't ask, they couldn't prompt, they couldn't move things along. The doctor asked the question, "How are you? What's going on?" and then stayed quiet until the patient would finally say, "Doc, are you going to talk? Are you going to talk to me?" So instead of the doctor moving things along in 1.5 or 2 minutes in the expediency, they would just sit there quietly. And what they found was it really only took like 5 or 6 minutes, at which point the patient had said everything they needed to say, got it on the table, and said, "Doc, are you going to talk to me?" But what the doctors found was in that 5 or 6 minutes, they learned way more than if they had bombarded them with 20 questions. They would not have known what to answer. Person for themselves. If you take the time, that's why coaches just sit there quietly. I remember years ago, a very famous coach said, if I ask a really good question, I should be able to shut up for about 15 minutes and get everything that I need to make the next step happen. Just wanted to throw that into the mix.
I'd like to just also put maybe a bow on this and say that we have met the enemy and he is us. We as patients have a responsibility here to listen to our own bodies. I have an illness that causes me problems, and I have been told for years and years and years, well, you got to eat this way, you got to exercise that way, you got to do this, you got to do the other thing. And now it turns out that I have a completely different, newly discovered disease for which everything they told me to do right was wrong for me. And everything they told me to do wrong was right for me. And thank God I listened to my own body. And I may have frustrated my wife, who's sitting right there, by saying, no, I'm not going to eat that way. No, I'm not going to do this. Our bodies communicate with our minds. Listen and stand up for yourself. That's the key. Stand up for yourself. Just because the person's wearing a white coat, they don't do that anymore, but sometimes they do. We think they're the experts and we've got to just listen to them. they're not the ones who are going to face the consequences. Be an advocate for yourself, please.
So I want us to wrap up this section with an examination of what questions are the big questions that remain unanswered. What are the questions that we're all living in right now? I mean, they may vary from individual to individual. For example, I don't want you to answer this question, but here's a question that I live in. If I'm going to live to be 100, what am I supposed to do with the remaining or extra years that I have? That's a question that I live with.
Big one.
Will we have a democracy? That's another question. So, I mean, there are questions that we're all floating with. I'd like to get to some of the big unanswered questions.
Lable a question. In today's chaotic environment, do you feel that the universe's moral arc of justice will actually finally swing back?
Well, it depends on what you mean by justice. Because there are a lot of people, no matter which way the moral arc swings, will feel that justice isn't done, which is why we got to have conversation. We've got to get on the same page, not identical to each other, but at least understand each other. If in my book, In Case of Emergency, Ask Question, I posit what I call the perfect question. It's a Swiss Army knife you can use in any situation. And the question is, what is out of harmony and how do we restore it? And the reason it's the perfect question, it's the easiest question to answer. You don't have to be a music theorist to notice when a note is out of harmony with the rest of the notes that are being played. You know harmony when you feel it. You know a lack of harmony when you don't feel it. And then it starts the hard process of asking, how do we restore harmony? I think our society today is at the lowest level of harmony than perhaps it's ever been. I haven't lived more than 73 years. Could be some time before that we were out of harmony more. Civil War was probably a pretty big time that we were out of harmony. So I think the reason that people feel that the moral arc is not swinging towards justice is because it's not swinging towards them. And I totally understand that. And I feel that way too. Why I consider it my most important thing that I can do to try to understand how we get to harmony. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Lable.
It's a great answer.
And I think harmony is so very important. And I think harmony within ourselves is a start. So if we look ahead and say, what can I do in my life for self-love and perhaps project that, I think that's a very positive thing to do.
I agree. I think that of all the versions of the golden rule out there, I like the one that says, love thy neighbor as thyself, because there's a hidden little quirk in there. You've got to love yourself first before you can love your neighbor. And so I think we have to come to self-love, self-compassion, self-care, and then go out and heal the world. People ask me, well, why aren't you out there more? And my answer is, you know what? I promise you, as soon as I get myself right, I'll go out and get everybody else right. Unfortunately, that's taking a little longer than I hoped it would.
Lable, can you remind us of Socrates' viewpoint on the subject of questions?
Sure. Everything was a question to Socrates. And I think it's most clear on his deathbed. His students came in and said to him, "We've bribed the guards, and they're going to let us sneak you out of here. But we got to go right now because there's going to be a changing of the guard really quickly. And so we got to get out of here now." Socrates said, "Well, let's stop and examine this." And his students said, "Are you crazy? We just told you your life is at stake here. And if we don't just move now, what's to examine? If we don't move now, you're going to be dead in about an hour." And Socrates said one of his most compelling and famous quotes. He said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And then he looked at it and he said, "Well, I think he was like about 80 years old or something. I've lived a good life, and I can either just say, okay, this is the consequence of the life I live, or I could try to run away, giving the lie to everything I've taught for all these years." And so he said, "No, you know what? I'll take the hemlock." And what a way to live your life. The unexamined life is not worth living.
Okay, we're going to do a broadcast edit because someone is talking and interrupted you. So everyone mute yourselves, and we're going to answer that question again from the point where you start with the quote from Socrates at the end.
Okay. So at that point, Socrates said his most famous quote. He said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And so he said, "I'll take a look at things. I've lived a very good life. I've lived very many years. Most people have lived. And so I'm willing to drink the hemlock if that preserves what I've taught for all these years. If I run away, it negates all that." And thank goodness, the reason we have all the wisdom that Socrates shared with us is because he decided to live the examined life. And we should live the examined life too. It's worth it. And I want to also state quickly, I disagree with almost every answer that Socrates came up with. But I love the method he used to get to the wrong answer. And that is questions. And that's his legacy to me. That's Professor Smith's legacy to me. I had one leg in a traditional world, and I went to college, and all of a sudden I was allowed to ask questions, but I had no idea how to do it. And Professor Smith did that to me and showed me to do it in a way that I can keep my one leg in the traditional world and the other leg in the world of being able to ask questions. And what a gift that gentleman gave to me.
And what a gift you are to me and to many others, Lable. Thank you so much, Lable Braun.